the time. And when I finally got to that baptism of fire, anything could come along. Right, yeah. It's the healing fire that did it. Yeah. You probably get communication between.
It's so, I tell you, my life has changed so much, Dawn. Yeah, right.
I retired.
Yeah, I know. When you retired,
I think it was somewhere around 70.
When you were 70.
Can you point them at the ceiling more?
Now I'm thinking of retiring from retirement.
Yeah.
It's too energetic. I got to take time off. So I've got to retire from retirement.
Yeah. It's funny. I had to raise the foot today, and I probably would have forgotten it. But the dawn. And it's odd for me to think of anyone as a role model. Really?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what role I'm preparing you for, but heaven be with you.
The phrase just came, and I
It gets
thought,
too shadowy on the faces.
That's better, that's better.
There we are.
Otherwise I'll have to go into another room.
I think we're almost ready to start, you know.
So, Dawn, we had a new member, okay, a new member, Michael Rosenberg. He's a new member of what? Well,
Serendipity.
Introduced, basically, a new member to be introduced. Rosenberg.
Good to see you, Michael.
nice to see you.
Yeah, good. You know, I think we might get this evening, and so why don't, maybe we'll get a little closer.
You ready to mic up?
Yeah. If we got a long agenda, I keep thinking of things we really ought to take up.
Tony. Hello, how are you? Good.
Oh, Marilyn likes those cushions.
Yes.
I just like having her nearby.
You do?
Yeah.
There we are.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Angela, you gonna sit down, join the crowd for a bit?
I will in a minute. I just have to take care of one more thing.
Okay. You have got any announcements to make tonight, Angela?
The announcements are just, this goes from 7 to 8:30, and will there be a book signing at all?
At 7:30?
No, 7 to 8:30.
7 to 8:30, yeah.
Will there be at all a book signing? Any chance of that?
Well, the price goes up double tonight. Overtime hours, you know.
Price list goes to doubling price list?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's all I had to say.
Really? My golly.
Isn't that simple?
I have a thing
Too simple. Yeah.
Since we already have the distraction of the thunder and the lightning, maybe we could turn our cell phones to ring, vibrate, or off, please? Thank
Very
you.
good.
You know, he makes the same announcement when it's clear sunshine.
He's learning something from you, John.
All I remember is in Hyderabad, when we didn't make the announcement, and it was like a circus of a cacophony of different ringers going off all day long.
They're energetic people down there, full of love. I guess the telephone bell makes them feel comfortable some way.
You should put a big basket, have everybody drop in the basket on their way. Leave your cell phone here.
We'll ask Angela if she's got a big basket. Well, shall we be silent with Baba and let the thunder do as it will?
Thank you.
Dearly beloved Baba, always in your loving arms. Amen. Everything all in tune back there?
Perfect.
Good, great. Well, the background of this particular subject. I think we called it Mayor Baba on Sexuality,
Close.
something like
Yeah.
that, yeah. And actually, the principal thing that had pushed it along, we're all friends, so we can use any sort of terminology that we want to, and I don't think anybody will turn purple and leave the room. So there had been, over a period of time, just a terribly, terribly, terribly tough, divisive occurrence in relation to sexuality, in this particular case, homosexuality. And because I was way over in Europe as this was all going on, every once in a while I'd get a progress or a regress report on this, and it all sounded very distressing and terribly sad, because the principal reason it was so much of it was sad to me is that I knew one or two or three or four of the people who were very deeply involved in both sides of the camp, whom I happened to have loved very, very dearly for years. And to see the conflagrations that were going on was really upsetting to me. So I always had in mind, I wonder if there's anything under the sun that I've got tucked away in my own background experiences, something maybe that Baba let slip sometime or another that could possibly be of any use in this particular situation, that might possibly, first of all, heal some of the wounds, because it was very, very obvious that a number of people had been deeply, deeply, deeply personally wounded. So that was it. I was in the middle, when things were breaking out, in the middle of writing a little book, which I promised myself would be the last thing I would ever write in this lifetime, and which eventually I called Some Results. So almost at the end of that, I tacked in some things, and in fact, a part of a personal chapter that I made a lot more detailed and frank than I had intended to. And so that simply revolved around what I call a homosexual episode in my own personal life, which was, I must say, extremely painful also, and took just an enormous amount of effort to try somewhere or another to wade through the conflagration into some sort of sanity somewhere, something that I could feel a little secure about. That was very, very tough. And so I put some of that in, and a couple of footnotes here and there. I don't think anybody ever particularly read it, because I certainly never got any comments back except one or two from people who were about 20 or 30 years even older than I was at that point, saying, well, Don, it took a lot of courage to do this.
Yeah.
And actually, it didn't take any courage at all. It was just something that during the course of the years, to my amazement, had worked out, and it had worked out so totally and completely that I felt completely at peace with it. So I thought, well, maybe this would be a little bit of help. But then when we were about to do a couple of these Mayor Baba's Word and the Three Bridges seminars at Myrtle Beach, somebody came up with a thought, well, wouldn't it be a good idea, possibly, to do an evening forum or panel discussion on the subject of sex and take up some of this old historic problem, which everybody even to this day always says, well, Don, it really has never been resolved or settled or peace made anywhere along the line. It doesn't seem to have gone anywhere towards the sort of solution that you would feel that Baba would want, and somewhere or another he would promote. And so when that sort of remark was passed through my ears a couple of times, I said to myself, well, this may be one of the last chances I would get to toss in a couple of things that could be of help here. Because when I wrote Some Results, and as it were, bared, let's say, the basic bones of what had happened rather unexpectedly to me in my mid-teens, I thought, well, maybe it's time now to bring things a little bit more into focus. And I also, as I reflected on it, remembered very vividly the one time Baba put his finger, his whole hand, right square into the problem for me.
That's a very important story.
And what happened, and what Baba chose as his central theme when he got into it was such a, may I use the word hell? It was such a hell of a surprise. I've got to be careful because he's got his little girl Aspen, and he doesn't want Don to get into the habit of swearing too much and undo his parental training with his daughter, you see. So anyway, he keeps me on the straight and narrow path as much as possible. So it was a tremendous surprise to me how Baba went about this. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, this is probably one of the most important contributions that I could make, an actual case history of how Baba went right square into the middle of the problem of my own daily life. But what he picked on to focus on and what he told me as the guidelines that I was to follow, that was just a tremendous surprise. And I think the surprise is one of the principal reasons that I want to present this. I think it should be a surprise to you and maybe open up a door in your own personal thinking on the subject. But I would like to. Are you all wet?
Not all, just.
Not all, just partially. You think you're going to be able to dry out?
I will.
Let's hope so. Right. If you need a towel, we'll probably be able to get one.
That's very sweet of you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Angela's smiling in back, but she smiles all of the time, so we go on. We're just starting to get into basic sex with Baba.
What is that?
Getting into basic sex with Baba. That doesn't mean going to bed or anything, you know. This is the philosophic approach. So I would like to go way, way, way back to the beginning, because I think for the things that I hope we can share between us this evening, it's necessary to go back right to the beginning. And the beginning, as far as I'm concerned, is what Baba himself says terribly, terribly clearly, not in tremendous detail. First thing I remember in relation to all this is that the sex drive, sanskara, energy, is one of the most ancient in our drop soul history. Basic experiences, natural sanskaras that we have, and he didn't say perhaps the most difficult. I don't think he went that far, but he certainly emphasized that it was terribly, terribly tough to deal with it and to manage to get anywhere with it, because of course we're all familiar with the fact that we, on the path of involution, during the process of involution, we will never get to the end of it until we've gotten rid of all of the sanskaras with their energy. There's a little bit of a tail on that, but if I get sidetracked on that, we'll spend the rest of the week on just that subject, so we'll put that aside for the moment. But he emphasizes what a terribly tough one it is. Goes on, and he sort of implies that it's pretty vigorous, right straight up through the planes, right up through the sixth plane, until, let's say, the perfect one comes along and has to take over. And it's only then that the last vestiges of the sex drive sanskara are finally eliminated. Little Bear's got to tell me something.
But we determined that if there was no master and the person was not veiled, that Baba said on the fifth plane, there's no more sexual desire.
Well, now that's an interesting.
I know we talked about it last time, but it's okay.
No,
I just
but
wanna-
I think you should say that out loud. You see, he tries to cover up for my ignorance every once in a while, but what I think he said is terribly germane. Do it out loud, please, Little Bear.
For Sahavas in France, I had to research what happens to the ego on the spiritual path. This is not what I was just saying to him, but I'm just giving you a little warm-up. So I read all these different things that Baba said about what happens to the ego on the spiritual path. And he actually said that if there is a veil over the disciple, so they're not consciously moving through the inner planes, then the lust that they experience lasts up until the 6th plane, and they're unveiled, and then it's all removed.
So I missed one plane, you see, forgive the count.
But if there's no veil, this was my understanding of it anyway, if there's no veil and the aspirant is conscious of their inner journey through the planes, then on the 5th plane, when they have control of their thoughts, the desire for sex is overcome. So I thought that was interesting.
Very, very
It's kind of a
interesting.
very, fine point. But,
Yeah. But anyway, it's a tough road to hoe.
well,
And
sure.
I've got to be perfectly honest with you. By now in my life, I've known an awful lot of deeply, deeply sincere, hard-working Baba devotees who take terribly serious what he says has got to happen to us before we finally get through and become realized at knowing ourselves as God again. So, and I would say of all of the tales that on occasion have just broken my heart, because these people are dear to me, you know. You become very fond of your companions over a long period of time, and you participate in their lives, and things that hurt them, they hurt you too. And the thing that has come up so frequently has been the tale of successive tragedy in personal relationship, love life, sex life, where things go wrong and you manage to live through it. And then first thing you know, another try in another direction or with another person, it ends up in just a tremendous carnage and so on. So after, you know, you hear about one person going through these until they're just absolutely on the ropes and wondering how under the sun, well, I mastered, get to the energy to live through this one that is busted out now, you know, just all tired out and no energy left. It sounds sort of discouraging, doesn't it? So, if there's anything that I have had drilled into me by these sharing of personal lives over the decades, is that I know that this business of getting rid of, whether it's to the 5th or to the 6th, is almost a small matter in comparison. Tough. And so one of the last things that we'll do tonight, if we get to it, and I guess we just got to get to it some way, is my suspicion of what maybe the Avatar has done to take pity on the devotee in this stage with this particular samskara.
Big subject.
It's a big subject, and if what we begin to suspect may have some real truth to it, it's terribly important. So, at any rate, let's go way back where all this stuff is beginning. I always remember that from my study of biology, I've always put, let's say, the start. I don't think Baba says that sex starts with the plant, does he? Well, anyway, for me, that's where it starts.
Yeah, in the discourse.
That's pretty early in the game. So it means it's been going on an awful long time. So that's point number one. And as you know, Baba says that the natural sanskaras, because the manner in which they're formed in their ancient lineage, are almost impossible for the devotee to eradicate or even do anything very consequential in relation to eliminating them without the help of a perfect one. So that means all of those, what is it, a few million times of shaking up the knots that we go through, all of that, this whole business of sex drive is there. And if anything, it's getting more complicated and deeper. Now, there is one consolation here. I have a personal pet theory that anybody who knows the name Meher Baba and has any idea what those two words mean is an individual who has been selected by Meher Baba himself, that he will take the person on the path. So this means that all of those long shaking of the samskaric knots that Baba says all of those hundreds of thousands of incarnations are about is over, and finally one is on the path. Because certainly the Avatar does not go out and stick out his neck and pick you unless you are ready for the path. He points out, he doesn't go into a very great amount of detail, that the perfect ones are always on the lookout and searching out for the drop souls who are ready and capable effectively of going on the path. So that's terribly clear from Baba. So I'm simply saying to you, it's pretty obvious to me, if you're sitting here and if you know the name Mayor Baba, which obviously you do, that means that you're on the path. It also means, almost certainly, that you're in this category that Little Bear was talking. By the way, if you haven't been introduced to him, Laurent Weisberger is sitting here, and because he's a nice person to get along with, and so I call him the Little Bear until I get annoyed, and then I call him, hey, you big moose. So there we are. So he's Little Bear until proven to be the big moose mode.
The night is young.
The night is young. Might happen awful soon. So there we are. So there we have all of this going on, and you almost certainly are under the veil. That's point number one. You don't know where you are. My own experience has been that certainly in the early part of the days when I was a Sufi under Murshid Martin and then under Baba's direct thumb, directly under his thumb, I would work and work and work and work, and I knew certain things in myself that I really just hated. And I wanted to try to get somewhere to get these things tossed into the ash can, effectively. Miserable things. And I'd get nowhere, and I'd think, my golly, how many lifetimes I'm going to have to wrestle with this blessed thing? Because I'd say, well, if in 10, 20 years I haven't gotten anywhere with this, I don't know how many lifetimes it's going to take really to wear it away. But if it's got to be done, okay. And then I told this little story the other day, but if you've forgotten it or weren't here, I tell it again. Then all of a sudden, one day, one of the stinkiest ones of them, that I had really spent an awful lot of time trying to do something about it, suddenly disappeared. It didn't mean that that part of my life disappeared. The extraordinary thing was I was just as deeply involved in all of the people and events and so on that I had been the day before when it would seem to be there in full force. But nevertheless, for all intents and purposes, the drive, the binding, the agony, the pushes and the pulls of it just weren't there. I could participate in that type of event in my life with just a sense of complete freedom and, amazingly enough, enjoyment, creative enjoyment. That was the thing that switched. What would you do? Which mode are you in now?
You're reminding me of a story that I think is really valuable. It's a really short one, but I think they'd appreciate it. Of the two things after you met Baba in 1952, the two things that you felt you wanted to try to work out on your own without his help.
Yeah, very easy.
Tell him that story.
Yeah. Well, it's just terribly easy. When I was going home on the plane, I just thought to myself, this was one of 2 or 3 very key things that happened to me. I was thinking, well, now it's going to be wonderful, wonderful just to turn over the end responsibility for these things to Baba. I didn't have an idea of laying it on his lap, but, you know, just the sense that he knew and he would know what I had to go through and when it would be done. Just that sense of guidance and security in his being was terrific. And then all of a sudden I thought to myself, oh, now wait a minute. No. Sex, money, no, I can't leave these up to Baba. So I reserved them to myself very consciously. And you know, the thing was, I knew the next time I met Baba that he knew exactly what I had reserved. I didn't apologize to him. I felt a little ashamed, but I still stuck by my decision because they were so important to me. You know, our family got into a terrific mess. So when I was 7 years old, my father died very young. So money, ever since I was a little tiny kid, was non-existent in the family. and the tortures that we had to go through just to sort of keep body and soul and food and clothing together. It was terrific. My mother was terrifically brave. She didn't sit around and mope and say you're spending too much and this and that and the other thing. But you know, we just all pitched into this problem of money. So I had a deep syndrome. Anyway, a deep, deep sense of concern about money. And I just knew I couldn't turn this over to Baba. I didn't have that much faith, but I wanted to keep the guidelines, and if a dollar was going out there, I wanted it to be Don Stevens who decided, and not Mayor Baba in India. So, and then as far as sex was concerned too, I just thought, well, gee whiz, this is such a touchy subject, and I've already gone through all sorts of messes and whatnot, and to try to figure out where Baba comes into it and what I ought to try to get from him, how to handle, it's just too complicated. I just can't get even Mayor Baba, whom I know I love and trust so much. I just can't let him. So I reserve them. And through years and years and years and years, Baba never touched the subject of money with me, about what to do with money, unless I would say to him, Baba, I'm a little embarrassed about so much money passing through my hands. I'd like to turn over monthly some money. Now that I controlled. I didn't ask Baba about doing that. But then when I once made the decision that I wanted to give a monthly amount, you know what? It took him about 1 year of conversations with me to decide how much and where it would go and the rules and so on. So when I finally turned one little decision over to him, boy, he made up for all the time we had lost together before then. So money and sex were the two that I reserved. And then I do remember finally when one day, especially on the subject of sex, I think I was in a funny little apartment in San Francisco, just off Bush Street. And I remember saying to myself when I got home one evening and was reflecting on what was happening in my sex life, and it was so miserable and so fouled up and so complicated and getting more so every day, it seemed to me, that just suddenly an exasperation, 2 or 3 times in my life I've done this, I just said to the wall, Baba, I turn it over to you. You can't make a worse mess of it than I have. Yeah, I said those words. It's funny what he will put up with us, you know. So, at any rate, the amazing thing is that immediately the next day, sex life started moving. It did. I will not tell you the gory details of how it moved, but I knew in my own being that it was moving, and the strange thing was it was moving in a fashion that I would never have had the courage on my own to make the decisions and push it here or there. It just sort of took on its own life and its own head, and I was almost dizzy trying to follow through in all of this. But boy, I had a sense of movement, and it was tough movement too.
But it wasn't like the money conversation where there was a lot of discussion with Baba about it.
No. This is probably about 2/3 of the way through this evening where that will come in. Anyway, so here we are. I've gotten myself into the position where I was reserving my own sex life and so on, and watching what was going on in relation to my friend's sex life very, very carefully. One of the things that impressed me very much was that Baba pointed out that by the time we're a human being, particularly when we're going on the spiritual path, we have been through thousands of incarnations as male and as female. And I don't think there's a person sitting here who doesn't know that Baba says that every time there is an experience in your life, there is a storage place that is populated with a sanskaric knot relating to that incident. And some of these storage places get pretty well jammed up and pretty deep over a course of time. So what it simply means is that every person who is sitting here as a male has had almost certainly just as many incarnations as a female, with all of these remembrances stored away back there, stored up psychic energy, knots, habit patterns related to female form as male. And every female sitting here has had in their reincarnations just about an equal number of male incarnations with male sexual experiences. So you see, we're loaded with two types of experiences. This is our heritage from our own life over millions of years, really. So all of these are there. And Baba points out something terribly important, and he says that normally the experiences of sex in the female form, when you are inhabiting a male form, are repressed.
By the form itself.
By the form itself. Somewhere or another, it sort of builds a protective dike around that part of your samskaric storage department in the mental body, so that they don't suddenly knock on the door and say, I want to get expressed. There is a natural, normal expression, inhibition that goes on, barrier. I wouldn't even quite call it a barrier. I used to be tempted to, little bear, but I don't think it's quite that firm. A barrier to me means something concrete and steel.
Membrane?
All right, something like a membrane, perhaps. That's a little bit more apt. In fact, maybe even a rather flexible membrane, as I've observed in some cases. So at any rate, Baba says that normally these are simply put over there in abeyance. Now, he says, actually, I want to call your memory back to you. He says something very similar about memories of previous lifetimes, previous reincarnations. He says, you've got all of those memories stored there, but in the usual so-called average or normal human being, there is something which inhibits previous lifetimes from coming through. And you remember his passage says, it's awful darn lucky for you that it works that way, because if you could remember all of the contradictory things you've been through, you'd just go nuts trying to absorb them and seeing all of the contrasts and contradiction. Baba's very clear on this, especially in relation to previous lifetimes. He is not nearly that emphatic about, let's say, the opposite sex barriers at all. There's another area, too, that I'm impressed by, and that is we certainly have from Baba his very clear statement that the perfect ones, including the avatar himself, do not, except on rare occasions, give the devotee psychic experiences. And he points out that we have an enormous stock of psychic energy associated with our dropped soul, but normally we do not have experiences in that area, get control of it, and also that the perfect ones, only on very rare occasions, do give psychic experiences. And he says we do it when we know that the dropped soul is going to go through an extremely important and a very trying phase of their ongoing. And then, on occasion, in order to buttress their confidence and optimism, we give them this. But at the same time, it is so unusual that there is an almost impossibly strong wish to repeat these experiences because they are so unusual. So he says it's a dangerous and ticklish sort of thing because it's awfully easy for them to want another tomorrow and another the next day and another the next day. And he says this is not spirituality. It's really psychology having an experience of this sort. But the individual can equate it with spirituality and have the false illusion they're pretty spiritually advanced having these sort of things happen to them. And instead of, if it starts they start pushing too much on it, it can vastly sidetrack and complicate their true spiritual ongoing. Baba's pretty clear on this. But he says excuse me, you had your hand up, please.
How would you define a psychic experience?
The psychic experience?
What would you say?
Well, let's say, just very simply, suppose I have a dream tonight and 2 weeks later, the exact same situation happens that I dreamt of 2 weeks earlier. This is a simple one, but happens to many people, something like that. So Baba says, be very, very careful and very wary of this. As a consequence, I always I have many friends who love Baba dearly, and they so much want contact with Baba. And every once in a while, one of them will, let's say, apparently start pushing a barrier or something or another. And when they start saying, Baba said this to me, and Baba said that to me, and Baba gave me that feeling, and Baba gave me that warning, and so on, I feel terribly, terribly jittery and sad, to be perfectly honest. The other occasion when I feel not jittery and sad, but a little mad, quite frankly, is when somebody says, well, he's on the 6th plane, and she's on the 4th plane. Well, how do you know, and who said so? If the people are under the veil, they can't know where they are. And so who's the red-hot person who has access to the knowledge of who's on which plane? To me, these are real spiritual booby traps that some people spend an awful lot of time and energy, and I'm afraid deluding themselves on. So these are things that I wish we could somewhere or another keep under control and almost get out of our vocabulary. But in these, the reason I bring them up is, nevertheless, there are people who do have psychic experiences fairly regularly. It does happen. And so, what has gone on here? And they're pretty darn good at it, some of them. Well, as far as I'm concerned, that inhibiting protective barrier has been permanently damaged. And so it is leaking through. These experiences are leaking through. But what do we do about it? Well, sometimes people admire them. Sometimes people feel sorry for them. But a leakage in that protective barrier, as far as I know, never tempts anybody to condemn the person. I've never known it to work that way. You simply say, well, oh, ain't it terrific that they had that experience? Or you say, the poor thing, they're leaking a bit at the seams, and that's a rather dangerous position to be in. And it's the same thing as far as reincarnation. My golly, how many people nowadays deliberately choose a hypnotist who can get them hypnotized back into previous reincarnations in their life. That's big business, absolutely. And even terribly good psychologists will, on occasion, use hypnotism to regress to find where a certain psychic knot that's got to be unknotted was generated, and get the person, if it's something that happened when you were a little child in this lifetime, a good psychologist can get you to regress, and all of a sudden you say, oh, my golly, something happened to me when I was 5 years old, and now I remember it, and just the unreleasing of that seems to perform almost a miraculous cure of something that is very, very fouled up in the person's nature. So we've got a long history, but it is on these subjects, but it is delicate, it is very important, and we need to be very, very sane about it. But my point is this, that nobody would condemn a person for having psychic experiences and feel that they were reprehensible and perverts or anything of the sort, nor in relation to regression and remembering previous lifetimes. At most, we would think, well, that's sort of too bad. That person is probably getting a bit confused and thinking that's important, whereas getting on with things in this lifetime is the really important one. Now, I hope I haven't stepped on too many toes up to now, because I realize there are an awful lot of us, including myself for a good chunk of my lifetime, who have done a great deal of looking at these subjects and very, very carefully, and even dabbling into experiments with them. I spent 6 of the most fascinating, exciting weeks of my life experimenting with thought concentration and what it could do. That almost blew my mind. I would never have dreamed that I could do these things. Absolutely incredible. But fortunately, I had some sort of a sixth sense that the first time I did one, and it worked out a lollapalooza, I had the instinct, Don, you're playing with fire. Don't push this too far. And
Be a
so,
trap, right?
or trap. So I went to the old family friend, Elizabeth Whitney, who was one of Carl Jung's earliest and greatest students, and said, I've got to consult you professionally. Told her and said, she said, well, it's unusual, but it does happen, and I suppose you want to go on further and see what happens. And I said, I've got to know. It's too important. But after 6 weeks of it, then I said, okay, now I know, so let's close up the hole. And I never did it again. So somewhere or another, we've got to be careful with these things. But again, I want to go back. Why is it that when, let's say, the barrier leaks on psychic phenomena, and also in relation to previous reincarnations, we have mixed reactions, but we never condemn? And why is it when the sex barrier starts developing a leak and somebody with, let's say, a male form involves himself in sex with other male forms, that we think that this is terribly reprehensible? Where is the particular psychic fault in this particular thing? I just called to your attention a discrepancy, because there's the same types of inhibition systems which are involved here. And we should at least be a little careful with our manner of judgment. So, at any rate, shall we open it up for just a little bit of discussion? Because I know that I have opened up some pretty touchy and delicate things also in the field of psychic phenomena, and also hypnotism and previous reincarnations. And if you want to get out your slingshot and let a stone fly, well, this is the time to do it.
I think there's about an hour left, Don.
An hour left.
Yeah.
By being celibate, you are preserving your psychic energy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So you really are, I mean, you're really strong with the energy when you're celibate.
Mm-hmm. Well, there certainly is a big energy factor here, but celibacy is a factor in both, let's say, heterosexual as well as homosexual relationship. So the question of celibacy is equally important for both predispositions, if you want to put it that way. I'm not arguing celibacy or no celibacy at this point at all. I couldn't argue it. Yes?
Two things. One is just to share that I heard you share this in Lake Balaton, Hungary back in 1993 about giving sex and money to Baba.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you said that it was relatively recent at the time, and that Baba had stepped in and just in relatively short order cleared up everything
On those two
issues.
Mm-hmm.
And it made a very good impression.
I certainly should not have said he had cleared up everything on sex, but he sure got it moving. But I'll carry the history further on this evening.
I'm paraphrasing from memory.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it made a very deep impression, and I was in Europe for a while because of some UN conference that was covering it. When I got back,
Incidentally, your old European friends miss you.
I'd love to see them again.
Yeah, they would love to see you, Tony.
And when I got back to New York, I sat on the edge of my bed one day and looked at Baba's picture and thought about, not so much about sex or money, but about relationship and intimate relationship. And by this point I was ready, and I just put it in Baba's hands. I had one little condition that I considered more of an understanding than a condition. And almost immediately things came into motion.
It's amazing, isn't it?
And it seemed to be Baba's direct response, and a particular person and everything. Because that was the situation that turning me around enough to begin the work that was necessary to
Yeah.
have that relationship, which I feel I have now. But it was life-changing, the power of just doing that.
Yeah.
And
Baba is a tremendously, what should I say, discreet, ethical individual, and I found he does not enter until you invite him in.
And the second point is about this membrane or channel or division in all three areas, whether it was sex, psychic phenomena, and past lives. My feeling on that is that it's not necessarily, and I'm not sure you're saying that it is, but not necessarily an aberrational thing, that a point comes where there's a bit of a gradual thinning of the veils, and there's less need for such a strict boundary, that one becomes more consciously able to navigate with balance through those areas.
Sure. There certainly is progress, Tony, no question. Anybody else like to toss anything else into the pack?
Just one clarification.
Yes.
You said you have to invite Baba in.
Yeah.
Clarifying that means to accept Baba. You have to accept Baba. Accept that Baba will help you. Okay, that's what it really means.
Yeah.
Accept Baba. You have to accept within yourself that Baba's going to help you.
But those are, can I say something?
Please go
I
ahead.
hear two separate things there. Is it Ira?
Yes, yes.
Ira? I mean, what I hear Donna saying is, I feel it's tremendously important that Baba doesn't force issues. He waits to be invited into those issues. And I think that's I just find that fascinating and astounding. And what you're saying, I think, is also true, but I don't see them as the same.
Incidentally, I pinned on your word help, Ira, and I just immediately said to myself, I wonder if I can avoid the temptation to plunge into that barbed word help, and what is help, and how does Baba help, and how does he not help, and how must we not expect him to help. So this is a terribly, terribly important word. I don't know, maybe we should spend 5 or 10 minutes on it, because it's so key in so much of our relationship to Baba. You know, I know so many of my friends who take terribly literally, and feel that's the end of the story. Place your burden on Baba's knees, and he'll solve them. If you just do it and wholeheartedly do it, he takes over the responsibility, and that's the end of the story. And you know, I've had to see what happens in my own case when I've come close to something like that, and I've also seen what happens to people that I'm terribly fond of when they do it, and let's say when they come to a state of stalemate and disillusionment and bitterness by having expected that help is a total thing. And there, at that point, you back out of the equation.
I think some people look at help and the whole issue of surrender as removal of suffering. They think if they surrender the issue, it means that the suffering involved in it will be removed. And that certainly hasn't been my experience of what it means.
And it certainly doesn't mean that you don't have to put a lot of effort and guts into the thing yourself. You got a lot of coal to heave around. Please.
There are some people that they channel like beings, and they call them archangels, and is this a permanent?
They call it what? I missed a
They
word.
call them like archangel this or that.
Oh yes. Mm-hmm.
Are these people and these people that have like perhaps near-death experience, and they've been given like seeing the being saying that this is your destiny and carry on? Is this permanent leakage, or is this?
Well, is anybody sitting here pretty much of an expert in relation to archangels and
An expert?
An expert.
What kind of expert?
Well, I first of all read up on what Baba says about it, because he says a fair amount. You have. All right. Do you want to hold forth for a little bit on this? Thank you. I always, my primary association, this doesn't get anywhere close to your point, but I just have to say it. My closest association with archangels and so on are Will and Mary Beckett from London. And Baba always said, these are my archangels, not angels, archangels. And really, living around Will and Mary Beckett, I thought they deserved the term beautifully. Now, they were physical human beings, and with, just really angelic natures. Mary was a little bit hard-bitten at times, but nevertheless, this is my association with Baba's usage of archangels, and I have seen their influence on people over several decades in England before both of them died. And to see what those two people did just by their presence, I think, is one of the most beautiful examples of angelic nature influencing just by its presence some terribly, terribly hard-bitten people. But it seems to me I also remember that angels and archangels, even and so on, never come to human form, and that precipitates this. Ring a bell, does it, Tom? Didn't you and I have an exchange on this?
I don't know.
Angels and archangels. I thought it was Tom, because we've had some interesting correspondences on a lot of things.
I remember this part.
Would you tell that, because you don't remember, or
I
you
do.
You do.
Well, Baba said that if you believe all the things from the various sources, that they are souls who became conscious in the subtle world or in the mental world before ever becoming embodied in the material gross world. So they've been existing and functioning on behalf of God's will without a human form or without any material form for a long time, and that in order to return to a conscious union with God, they need at least one human lifetime. And he said that one lifetime is a lifetime of tremendous suffering for them.
And certainly it is very clear that Baba says that the whatever things there are which are holding the dropped soul from realization must be worked through in human physical form, in the physical world.
I believe that even extends to the fact that, this is my understanding, that a soul between lifetimes can't make conscious progress on the spiritual path. It has to be done in a human form.
Well, this is certainly my recollection of that. And this, incidentally, gets back to something that had always intrigued me in relation to samskaras, and that is that since they were formed in complex physical situations, I've certainly come to the conclusion that that is the only way that they can also be unwound and de-energized in the same ones. And hence the reason that the individual who believes that they can make great spiritual progress, well, let's say the archetypal one is to retreat to a cave in a mountain, but this is completely contrary to the type of environment in which the sanskaras originally formed. So what under the sun can that sort of an environment do? It's great for repose and digesting and calming the nerves, but doing anything basic and fundamental with the samskaras, which are the real barrier, I've never been able to see that it could do anything. Incidentally, Baba does not say that, as far as I know, so please don't say Stevens gave us a new insight into Mayor Baba, the Lord, because I don't think that's true.
And also, I think in God Speaks, Baba talks about the archangels as being responsible for the major divine functions like creation and preservation and destruction.
That I don't remember, Tony. But I do know a number of people who've talked with me who were fascinated by angels and archangels have said something very similar to that. Was there one more hand somewhere? Yes, please.
Just to continue clarifying, would that mean then that the persons who say that they are channeling an archangel, is it really the archangel, or is it that soul that is having that experience of the, that intellectual being, or that being of intelligence? That's really themselves, in other words.
Well, I think it is a rare person who has meaningful internal contact with angelic entities. And it reminds me of a similar situation that I've run into so often of an individual who has great capabilities of healing by the laying on of hands and so on. And they frequently use the term, I'm simply channeling divine energy. I'm simply a link. And I just have to say that the individual, Baba makes it terribly clear when he discusses the various planes and at what point you begin to have some sort of access to universal energy. You're pretty well along up in the planes. And I think it is too clear that a great majority of people who do have ability to effect psychic healing and say, I'm only channeling God's divine energy or divine energy, end of story, that they are simply using their own resources of psychic energy. And this is what I call the camel's hump. And forgive me, this is just Don Stevens thinking out loud to himself over a few decades on energy, because energy has always been a great problem in my life. I've always found that I had more ideas than I had time and energy to carry out effectively. So I rather early came to the conclusion, I think perhaps from certain literature that I had read, that each individual has a natural store of energy. And I just thought I have to have some sort of a physical symbol, so I always thought of it like the hump on a camel, which we know well is the storehouse of a reserve of energy. And I always think of every individual human being of having a reserve of psychic energy like a camel's hump. And if you use and you use and you use, one day you're just flat on your back. And when that happened to me when I was about 18 years old, I just could not believe what had happened to me and how long it took me to start getting enough of a camel's hump back so I could function fairly normally again. So this reserve has tremendous meaning to me. And then I have seen many people who were very good healers, so-called, for a period of time, and then they went blah. And why did they go blah? Because they were not channeling divine energy. They were nowhere near the plane where you start having access to it. They were using up their own camel's hump. And when the camel's hump was gone, they had no reserve left. And they were really defunct. So here we are. Yes, please.
Don, Hugh McClanahan.
Yes, Hugh.
You had asked a question earlier about, somebody has psychic inclinations and other people don't feel threatened, or somebody has homosexual inclinations and other people will feel threatened by it, and what is the reason for that? Or something like that you would.
Sure, exactly.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how repression is a factor that leads people to be threatened by, perhaps more threatened by somebody's homosexuality than they would be by somebody's psychic inclinations. And I also wonder if you could say something about...
That's a good point, Hugh, an awfully good point. Go ahead.
Huge point.
Yeah.
And also you mentioned that we have male inclinations and female inclinations, but I've come to think over the years that, and my understanding of Baba is that sexuality is a continuum, and on either side of the continuum we have male and female, but we also, in going through that continuum, we go through periods or stages or incarnations of experiencing a little of both, or maybe 75% of both or 25% of the other, and so that every soul not only experiences male and female inclinations, but in going through the process of the 8,400,000 inclinations, they're also...
Oh, I'm glad you got that statistic for me. Thank you. Go ahead, you.
Well, that's just the human form, it's not dealing with the
Sure.
animal form.
That's right.
But they're also having experiences of bisexuality, homosexuality,
Yeah.
or asexuality.
In other words,
Or-
partial.
Right.
Yes, that's an awfully important subject. I don't know that I am the person who could, let's say, capably deal with that. What you say is perfectly logical. I am absolutely certain that you are right, but I have never gone into the subject or tried to feel into it intuitively, Hugh. If anybody's got something to offer on that, it's an aspect of the problem which I think is extremely important. So bring up anything that you know from your own experience or your own intuitions quickly.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons why I raised that, Don, is I think that if we could get, as a human race, if we could get beyond the notion of something being abnormal and learn to accept that normal includes many forms or expressions of behavior,
Yeah.
then that might decrease the need to repress in many people, or the need to feel threatened by
Yeah.
observing that kind of behavior
Yeah.
in someone else.
Well, when you use the word repress, remember we've got to differentiate between two types of repression. Repressing, which is done, let's say, as Baba says, through the natural repression of body form, which apparently is a natural repression. But when, let's say, a particular, if you're in a male form, and suddenly you have an instinct to have relationship with another male, and you say, no, that's bad and it's abnormal, and you repress that, that's a different type. That is an active repression of an awakened samskaric pattern.
Can we call that one mechanical repression, to give it a different name?
All right, if we call it mechanical as against natural, in other words, a willed repression.
Yeah.
And this is what Baba warns us on, that many, many times when you think that you're mastering something or another, by kicking it under the carpet, he warns and says, look, maybe it's successful for a while, but you are gradually building up repressed energy each time that you kick it under, and finally that repressed energy builds up to the explosion point, and then you're in trouble when it explodes.
You want to tell a story about what Baba said to the hand?
Yeah.
Because you're running out of time.
We are. Already?
Okay.
Little Bear says that a lot of that hour left is already evaporated. Good heavenly days. You are so right. We've got two huge compartments we still got to do. Well,
I just want to say
yes,
one
please.
thing. There is an article that I read that Erich wrote. I think it was in the Glow magazine, and it was on sex. And he said, specifically, I remember him stating, sex is there for us to get past it.
I haven't read that as,
I know, I wish
and I haven't
brought
read it attributed to Erich, because,
I wish I brought that article. I'll have to send it to
yeah,
you.
would you please?
Yes.
Because Erich is pretty much a realist, in almost everything that he says.
Great article.
And that was just a little bit too glib, that particular statement for me.
There was an article in the Society,
Was it?
Tommy Roberts newsletter with
The problem with sex.
something like that by Erich.
I don't know if I read the same one, Marilyn, but I read a similar one recently by Erich. Not that it was published recently, but I just got a big box of like 15 years of Glow from a friend of mine. So I went through them and I was reading it, and it was great. And I think the way Erich was framing the whole conversation was the idea that our lust and our sex drive is basically baggage and an inheritance from our animal and previous,
Sure.
evolutionary experiences, and we really don't need it anymore in order to get back to our conscious union with God. So in that sense, yes, we needed it to get here, and now we need to get beyond it to keep moving, that kind of thing. Is that?
Yes, but I'll have to get the article for you. That's exactly right.
Let's have the straight quote. I'll be very curious, Marilyn.
Okay.
Well, let's get on back to where we were, that we've all got, let's say, a lot of Sanskaric baggage stored in the mental body, which relates to female form. We've got a comparable amount, certainly, in male form. We're all in the same place. Baba says normally it's the body itself which exercises a certain barrier effect, but obviously leakage can occur. And it's not only that leakage can occur, but there can be accidents, and also you can be pushed into something, into having experience, in other words, seduced, just purely and simply, which happened to me when I was about 16 years old by an older, very, very close companion. And I was horrified and just really terribly upset, and finally completely broke off friendship because of it. But that certainly I found was not the solution to the whole Pandora's box that had been let loose. Evidently something, let's say some part of the barrier had been rented, and so things could leak through. And so I said to myself, well, obviously I can't sit around and kid myself. And by that time I was enough involved in mysticism and became a Sufi and went under Baba's thumb, and knew that you don't make yourself from simply the will to be this or to be that. You know, it comes from much deeper patterns within yourself. So I knew I had to live through something. And when Baba took us over in 45, and I met him face to face in 52, I was square in the middle of trying to do an honest job of cleaning up the wreckage. It was just that simple. So I knew when Baba, as I explained the other day, in my first moments in front of Baba in 1952 in New York, that A, as the little man said to me, he knows you better than you know yourself, and B, he accepts you totally as you are. And so I knew, amongst many other things, I didn't single it out, that he knew about this seduction, homosexual experience, and that I had lived already some pretty tough times trying to resolve what that had let loose, and had not gotten terribly far with it. Made no effort to hide it from him, but the fact that he accepted me, and I knew it totally, meant that he accepted that experience in my life. And it was a tremendous help to me, because I felt from that point on no shame of something like that having happened to me. I was thought maybe some way I could have avoided it or something of that sort, you know. Somewhere or another you should have gotten out of the path of the steamroller when it was coming along. So anyway, each time that I went to see Baba, I always knew that he might possibly take up this particular problem, which was still rampant in my life. And he did not, and he did not, and he did not, and I felt that I was getting absolutely nowhere fast with it. And I had a so-called companion at that time that I was doing my best to work through some sort of a logical, human, honest relationship, and instead of it getting anywhere, all that it did was to complicate life and him and me more and more, and extremely painfully. And so, you know, I was thinking, my golly, this is going to take a long, long time, apparently, maybe a few lifetimes to work out. And then just suddenly, one day, Arish, Baba and I were sitting in Mandalay Hall. And every once in a while this would happen, you know, maybe once in every 3 times that I was with Baba, just all of a sudden he would stop in the middle of his subject and look at me and say, Don, so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. And on this particular occasion, he said, Don, of course I know about your relationship relationship with so-and-so, and how extremely difficult it is. Well, until he knew about it. And I knew also that at any point he might bring it up and he might tell me, read me the riot act and say, you're a stupid fool and you should have done so-and-so. You know, I knew anything could happen, and Baba could say anything in relation to it. So when he said, I know so-and-so, it is a very, very tough relationship to deal with because of the nature of the individual that is involved. And he said, I also know your nature, Don, which is when you decide to do something, you will not let go of it until you've done it. And he said, in this particular case, though, the wear on you could undermine your health. Now, isn't this an interesting thing for Baba to concentrate on? You know, he could have gone into normality, abnormality,
Sanskaras.
the whole tribe of it, you know, and so on. But he said, this could undermine your health. That had never occurred to me, because, you know, I've got a tough, stubborn mind, and even if it had undermined my health, I'm not sure that I would have given up. I would somewhere, and I would have said, well, I'm going to take a pause or a breather and then get back in and fight like holy hell again. Well, right? So there we are. So I'll watch it. So then, what does he do? What does he do? It's the only time he said to me, Don, Baba wants you to make him a promise. Amazing. He said, Don, at any time when you find out inside of yourself that your health is being undermined in this situation, that you will cut it off and you will never look back. Well, that was absolutely the last thing under the sun that I would have thought, that Baba would say about anything. Stop it, don't try to resolve it and carry it any further. It just didn't sound like Baba to me. And secondly, the thing that absolutely stunned me was that my health was the prime consideration in this whole thing. You know, nothing about natural, unnatural, what are you doing to yourself, you're wasting energy or whatnot, and nothing at all, just your bodily health, your ability to carry on as a human being. And if you see that this is happening, honestly, it is your Baba wants you to promise that you will then cut off the relationship at once and never look back. He gave me no leeway to try to argue with a person or threaten or anything of the sort. If I was at that point, bang, okay, you close the lid. And as a matter of fact, it wasn't a year later that I suddenly found out, my golly, last time I was around that person, by that time our paths were going in different directions. We rarely saw each other. But even so, I was still trying to do something about it, and when we would get together, I found it terribly draining. And on the last time we had been around each other for a few days, it had been one of the most god-awful draining things I've ever experienced in my life. And when I looked inside of myself, when I was traveling off somewhere else, I suddenly said, I know this is what Baba meant, because I feel almost destroyed inside of myself. And so I cut off, and I never looked back. I did one thing. I tried to preserve simple friendship, but that didn't work out either. And so I didn't look back again. Now, that was, let's say, unexpectedly how Baba handled me. But I also want to put into the record what I saw of how Baba handled what we call homosexuals who are out in the open. Isn't that the expression these days?
Out of the closet.
Out of the closet, out of the closet. I don't know what goes on in the closet, but they're out of it at any rate.
That's why it's in the closet, you're not supposed to know what goes on.
That's a good point.
Depends on how big the closet is.
Yeah, I see. Well, that's a good practical point. So, when I was in Myrtle Beach in 1956, Margaret Krask, wonderful Margaret Krask, had any number of dancers who really fell in love with Baba, and quite a number of those were out of the closet homosexuals and lesbians, and some of the most delightful people I ever ran into. But at any rate, when places were being assigned for people to stay, Baba wanted me to stay in a cabin which had 2 or 3 of the dancers who were all out of the closet homosexuals. And so I thought to myself, my golly, what am I going to do here? What am I getting into? Boy, this is going to be quite a stew pot in the laboratory. And almost immediately I found that these were 3 of the most delightful, charming, dependable people I'd ever been around in my life. And so for days on end, I saw regularly, day by day, how Baba handled my 3 roommates, plus several others that I knew were out of the closet too. And there was never the slightest hint of any reprobation, any incriminating or even slightly angry or surly remarks or gestures from Baba. Not at all. If there was anything that was noticeable, that was simply, honestly, that Baba was even more tender with these people than he was with the other spread around the landscape. It was just obvious to me. He would choose so many ways to get them involved, close to him. For instance, he was in, I guess maybe that was in 58 when he was in the...
After the car accident.
After the car accident, when he had to be carried in that chaise thing with 2 poles. And it was almost always 2 or 3 or 4 of the dancers that Baba asked to carry him, a great honor. Again and again and again, he showed so much favor to him. The other thing that I have to say, and in later years this became very evident, going way back into the early visits that Baba made, there were little children and even 1 or 2 babies that Baba would cuddle up and show all sorts of favors. And I saw them grow up, in later meetings with Baba. And several of those were out of the closet homosexuals and lesbians. And Baba was with them with great love from the time they were tiny little kids or infants in arms, who grew up into homosexuals and lesbians. And among the people that are known to have had this great love for Baba, and he for them. So this is my experience of Baba's example to us. And I think, what I also learned when he took up the topic with me, what he regarded being a priority, is a tremendous indication of what the Avatar himself feels on the subject. Anyway, this is what we discussed down at Myrtle Beach. So is there any part of that, because there's one other thing that we've got 15 minutes that we might take a crack at.
Are you going to do tactual sublimation? Are you going to do
Yeah.
Do you think that what Baba did in 58 with giving the dancers such a pronounced place, that might have been actually an outward, a desire on his part to outwardly show to others?
I took it that way, quite frankly. I took it that way. And that's one of the reasons that I brought it up, because all of this big riffraff at Myrtle Beach occurred, in fairly recent times, and many people who got deeply involved in that never had the experience of seeing Baba himself handle people out of the closet. So this is one other thing to remind people of it.
Am I allowed to ask you?
Absolutely, please.
What struck me about this whole conversation when we first did it down in Myrtle Beach, and it's still true now, is that we have God Speaks, Discourses, Life at its Best, Beams, Listen Humanity, and Lord Mayher, just to name a few of the possible places where there could be something. And in those 6 sources, one of which is 20 volumes long, there's only one usage of the word homosexuality by Mayor Baba. You'd think if this was a problem, he'd take the opportunity in his words to express that. Wouldn't you, Don?
It's a very good point. And of course, those are not motion picture documents, and so you don't see what was unsaid, but certainly expressed in very vivid manners. Yes, Tony?
This reminds me that with the dancers, the attention to the dancers, reminds me of it. It's reported that in Myrtle Beach, whenever a black person came to Baba, that he would always stand up and go to them. And one incident I remember reading where they stopped to use a bathroom on the road, and there was the white and the colored toilet. He went into the colored toilet.
I think I remember hearing about that,
Because
Tony.
of Florence, South Carolina.
Maybe so. And in both cases, it has the flavor of his compassion that here are two groups who are being singled out for a great deal of suffering.
Yeah.
And his just compassion to go that extra length.
Well, you know, more and more, Tony, there's another word that I have to use more and more in my remembrance of Baba's actions, and that is tenderness. His infinite tenderness. Absolutely incredible. Compassion almost sounds biblical to me, but the tenderness, you know, that's right there at home, fingertips. Well, I'd like to go into one of the other aspects of this business of the problems of sex and how one deals with it, especially in the phases of involution where it seems to come to a head in so many people's lives, and even tragically. Several years ago, we were trying to put to bed the Spanish translation of God Speaks with a fine publisher in Spain. And when he read the translation of God Speaks and passed it to his father, also, the two of them said, Mr. Stevens, nothing like this has been written for 5,000 years. It is marvelous. But it is a big, expensive proposition, and we want, before we do it, a reasonably short biography, half biography and half a thumbnail sketch of Baba's philosophy of creation and humanity. And the son said, you do it for us. So, of course, I tried to duck it for a year and a half, and finally had to do it. But when I finally had to do it, I had, for the first time, really, to go over systematically incident after incident after incident of my own relationship of being with Baba. I was simply reviewing it in my mind, the patterns and so on. And so I became aware as I was doing my homework for that biography of rather unusual things. They happened so frequently with Baba, and when they were just happening, they seemed ordinary, everyday, of-the-mill happenings. But it wasn't until I began looking at the sweep of my life with Baba that I began to be impressed by certain things that I hadn't. And one of the most unusual ones of those, just very simply, was how many times I got hugged by Baba. It was a phenomenal amount of time. As Little Bear points out, we don't know how many times maybe he might have hugged one of the ladies or Mani or something of that sort, because we're not privileged to that. But certainly, I know in the male population around Mayor Baba, I must have easily the highest count of, let's say, hugs, kissing on the cheek, kissing on the throat, holding hands in the car, holding hands going from the barn back to the old kitchen shack in Myrtle Beach, things of that sort. And it's always been, you know, just one of those, I would remember this one, I'd remember that one. The last time when he called me 3 times back to the doorstep to get hugged again, you know. And just such tenderness as that, it just seemed part of, you know, the great, grand Baba doing these lovely human things. And so, but then when I stopped to think of it, my golly, what did that do in my life? Because the avatar doesn't just sit around and do foolish, empty gestures, you know. He's doing things because it's needful somewhere or another. It answers something that should be done, needs to be done, even if it's just to soothe Stevens's ego even. So I began thinking about that, and then I remembered, well, how many times have I been around him when he has been for some time in seclusion, is breaking the seclusion, and has allowed a great big group of men and women to come and receive his darshan. Every single time, some point, he would line up the men in a row, he would line up the women in a row, he would go right down the row, hugging one after another on both shoulders. Now, isn't that extraordinary? And I thought to myself, well, I'm not a student of esoteric thought and biographies of great religious figures, but I'm not stupid completely on that, and I don't remember ever hearing anything even approximating something like that. And what was Baba up to in this particular case? So that was one thing that struck me. And then I remembered something else that really impressed me tremendously, and that was once when it was getting close to the end of Baba's life in the body, and on one occasion I shared a lot of things with Arish, quite personal things we traded punches on, and I told him about something that I'd finally screwed up my courage in my personal life to do, and Arish looked at me absolutely astonished and said, "Don, you did that?" Now, that didn't mean that I was normally an old Casper milquetoast and never had the courage to do anything, but this took a little bit of guts, I must say so myself. And so he said, "Well, for that, Don, I'm going to tell you the story of the new life." Now, I've always been fascinated by the new life because, I just knew in my bones that Baba was setting down patterns for humanity to love for eternity. And remember, he said, now I've done it to 100%, and the pattern of the new life is set down, and it will be there into eternity, even if there is not one human being to live it. And that impressed me very much, and I was always looking for those patterns. So for Arish to say, "Don, I'm going to tell you the story of the new life," it was manna from heaven. So the next time I came, Arish had spent hours writing up notes to tell me. He said, "Bring along your tape recorder. You can tape record it if you want to." He had gotten the women mandali to do the same thing. So after Arish had spent a day and a half telling me from his notes what went on, then we went over to the women's quarter, and they spent a half a day tape recording for me of their experiences. This, of course, became Tales from the New Life. That was the episode of how that was done. But at any rate, let's go back to when I was recording all of this, and the women had done their part, and it was late the afternoon of the second day, and Arish says to me, "Well, Don, what's your feeling? What's your impression now about the new life?" And I could see his look of expectation, that I was going to go into a rhapsody. And you know enough about Stevens's inimitable way of putting his foot in the closest mud puddle. You can be darn sure that I didn't do it right this time, and I certainly didn't. So I said, "Well, Arish, it's an absolutely astonishing and a tremendous tale, but really, how under the sun did you people who went with Baba have the courage to endure all of those hardships and crises for all those months?" I was, it just seemed to me that one thing after another kept happening, and this went wrong, and it was too cold, and they didn't have the proper clothing, and so on and so on. So Arish, when I said that to him, he looked absolutely stunned. And then he said, "Don, then I failed you." And to have Arish say that, it broke my heart, because I knew how much time and energy had put into this, getting all the women mandali lined up for it. So I immediately apologized and said, "Oh, Arish, well, I'm so sorry that I mentioned that. It's absolutely wonderful, and I thank you so much." And he just broke me off and said, "No, Don, I failed you." And so I couldn't say anything anymore, and I waited a few minutes, and then he went on and he said, Don, you cannot imagine the glory of close companionship with the Avatar, such as we had in the new life. The glory of his companionship. And that woke me up. And I realized that this thing that Baba talks about in his last message on the alphabet board, and inner links, and the importance of being joined in a chain of inner links, is for real, and that almost certainly the Avatar himself was setting down what we would perhaps call the archetypal form of real companionship. And that's terribly important. And then I began to think to myself, I put two and two together, and I said, is it possible that all of those hugs and kisses and hand-holding and so on, which were so lovely and warm, and as far as I know, absolutely unprecedented in esoteric history, is it possible that perhaps the Avatar is taking pity on the dropped souls in the involutionary part of the path, where they're having to go through the tortures of the damned repeatedly and getting through the last of this tremendous sex drive, which is causing so much trouble and so much pain constantly in life? Is he in some way or another showing us that there is an element that we can call companionship, which is not necessarily sexual, but has he demonstrated a warmth of touch involved? And I said, is it possible then that maybe he did something, I coined the term in my mind, tactual sublimation, that he set down and the standards for it.
Companionship is comforting. Okay?
Companionship is?
Comforting.
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 Company.
Comforting. Comfort. Comforting.
Comforting.
Comforting, yes, that's what I thought you
Yeah,
said.
so that's it. Okay? It's sublimation. Okay? That comforting, you sublimate that.
Well, you know, I must say absolutely that I was tremendously aware of the physical warmth of Baba's contact.
Right.
But there certainly was absolutely, as far as I knew, no sexual element. He certainly had no sexual expression of it passing on to me, and I certainly had no arousal of any type in relation to him, but I was tremendously aware of warmth.
And affection.
And affection, and deep, you know, real tenderness. This is the only word I can put to it. Real tenderness. So I'd just tell you one other little story that said so much to me. Do we have time, Little Bear?
Yeah.
We got 2 minutes.
I think Angela might give us an extra 5.
Oh, Angela is always generous.
There's lots of tape.
At any rate,
Lots of tape.
I have told many of you on different occasions a little story about when my prostate gland, I'm terribly frank, I'm sorry I'm built this way, started acting up, and I'd have to get up at 3:30 in the morning to go to the bathroom and then rush back to bed before I got cold, and then take me an hour to get back to sleep again. So it was always a rush. But then I began finding that as I was rushing back to bed, all of a sudden, whang, right in the middle of my head, something, would clarify itself excitingly. That was long before I even tied the word intuition to this. And then I began to realize, well, these are intuitions, and this is when my mind is quiet so they can get through, The static level is down at that point considerably, so they can make their voice felt. So, at any rate, on one occasion when I was rushing back to bed and hopping into bed, I'd gotten a little bit colder and I couldn't get back to sleep, and then I suddenly remembered something that had happened during the course of the day that had just made me horribly angry. And I was so angry that I couldn't get on to the neutral plateau. Don't ask me what the neutral plateau is, because we don't have time for it. I couldn't get back on the neutral plateau, and all of this steamy sensation was going on in me, and I thought, I'll never get back to sleep now. And because I couldn't get back to sleep and I was still angry, I was aware of my surroundings, and there was just enough light in my bedroom so that I could see dimly the outlines of the bed, the outline of the window over there, the outlines even of my nose at the end of my face. And as I was looking sort of, let's say, at how much of my cheeks I could see, something very, very strange began to happen. And it was something like, let's say, little wisps of something like steam or fog coming up from around my chin and cheeks and going up this way, and then off into the atmosphere. And I don't know if you've ever heard in science of what they call a cloud chamber. You know, you get sort of little bits of droplets, and then you put a particle through it and measure the trajectory or so on. Well, it was almost as if I were a cloud chamber here, and I suddenly thought, some way or another, I have a visual picture provided to me of samskaric energy and what happens to samskaric energy when it is awakened. Because I was angry. I knew I was angry, and that samskara associated with that type of event was boiling right hard. And because A, I couldn't do anything about it, B, I could at least be enough on my neutral plateau so that I did not make any sort of decision how I was going to avenge myself on this guy who had done this. So here it was, raw samskaric energy on the loose. And here it was, you know, I was just seeping out at the pores. But the interesting thing was that as these wisps of samskaric energy were floating around hither and yon, they were also evaporating and disappearing. And that was one of the most extraordinary insights that I've ever had in my life of what happens to samskaric energy when it is awakened, but you do not, or you refuse to put it into action. Some of it dissipates. Now, have you ever remembered, count 10 before you hit them or things of that sort, you know, or before you call them on the telephone and tell them off, you know. In other words, a waiting period.
So we can hit it?
And I suddenly thought, now I see the wisdom of this, and it simply means that if you can have a realistic something in your life that will cause you to not put awakened samskaric energy immediately into a situation and wrap it up again immediately into another samskaric knot, a real dissipation and an important dissipation of energy goes on. And if this happens again and again over a period of time, the samskaric energy disappears. Now, this is what I think could be the principle involved in tactual sublimation if the avatar has set down an archetype for it, and if it is for real. But it certainly has to be handled in a realistic and a very delicate manner. So this is something that really excites me because I have so much personal experience wrapped up in this with Baba himself. I have seen what happened to, let's say, my sexual lusts, shall we put it that way, from the time, let's say, that I came under Baba's thumb and began having Baba himself hugging me every once in a while, warmly, kiss on the cheek, real warmth and tenderness. And I just have to say that in recent years, as I've looked back, excuse me for the depth of the confessional here, I just have to say that some way or another, sexual energy got wiped out. That's all there is to it. Now, I certainly can enjoy physical form tremendously, but there is no, let's say, drive, which has to be controlled, kept under control. So I think, of course, I'm a much older man than I was 50 years ago. But still, I'm not going to go into all of the psychological details. I certainly know that there is, let's say, the form, the basis of sexual desire, but there is no energy associated. There can be aesthetic pleasure, but nothing more. So every time that I have seen a samskara disappear, and that's not been too many times because they're awful tough to get rid of, there is what I would call aesthetic pleasure in operating in that field which remains, but it is absolutely undriven. You do it because it's necessary, and also because it's beautiful what is involved, and the results are beautiful, they're right.
Is this what you mean by de-energizing also?
This is what I mean by de-energizing samskaras, but the form is not disappeared. Well, shall we leave it there for tonight? I think I used up Angela's 5 minutes. I used up 6 minutes, Angela.
Feel free to use more.
Thank you. Tony?
May I just
Yeah.
one thing?
Yeah.
I had three, but I'll just make it one.
Mhm.
Baba, at some point in my life, brought up the issue of homosexuality.
Mhm.
I didn't think of people's sexuality. Sometimes it would be really obvious if you were tuned to that,
Mhm.
but I wasn't.
Mhm.
And a point came where Baba clearly wanted me to be aware of where he was with that.
Mhm.
And it's just come back to me tonight because it's really come to a really place of fullness of understanding and peace.
Mhm.
But it began with you.
Oh, really?
I knew you from the times in society working on films where you did narration
Sure.
and so on. But I didn't think about your sexuality or anyone else's. And in 1980, I think it was, 82, you gave a talk at Phil, it wasn't Phil, it was Ian and Jean Brunette at the time in New Jersey. And a lot of us carpooled out on a Thursday night, and it was a real diverse cross-section of people, from really obviously looked from different backgrounds and lifestyles. And on the way back, I was in the car with 5 other people. I was sitting next to Mark Murray. And he said, what an amazing thing to have such a diverse cross-section of people travel so far on a weeknight to hear a gay businessman talk about God. And well, it was funny, except I said, what was that? It was the gay part that caught me.
Mhm. Yeah.
Anyway, so this is like full circle.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Well, now you know a few of the ins and the outs en route. Yes, please.
I have one question in 2 parts. Was this experience of dissipation, was it visceral? Like
I feel that this is, let's say, a gift of grace from Baba to me. I think it is typical of it. Somewhere or another, he allowed me to see, by means that normally would not be visual, the manner in which energy can be dissipated.
the dissipation itself, was it in the sensation, and how was the sensation in the body?
Well, my sensation in my body was that I was angry. So I knew there was a huge supply of samskaric energy on the loose.
Kind of burning.
Well, I was really burnt to a crisp, if I can be colloquial about it. I was mad when I remembered it at 3:30 still. So there was tremendous emotional energy around.
Because it reminds me of Rumi says that I was raw, then burnt.
Yeah.
What was the second part?
That was the second part.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, all I can say as far as, let's say, the energy was concerned, it certainly was there. It was loose, and in some fashion or another, Baba clothed it so that I could see what was going on and make the tie over to an important principle related to samskaric energy. And this, incidentally, is the principle that underlies the efficacy, the value of the provisional ego principle in which you make your master your real source of goodness, of joy in life, rather than your own desires. And you may remember that Baba said, when this can happen to you, when it is deep and sincere, then your own ego, which is set aside, goes through a fundamental fracturing from which it never recovers. But there are other ways also, in addition to, let's say, making the master your provisional ego, which has the capability of holding up decision. And one of the cleverest ones that I've ever run into in my life and experienced is, let's say, such a thing as a vow of honesty, which I had to take twice to Baba. And I tell you, because Baba is reality to me, he was from the instant I met him. And so when Baba had me, one way or another, twice take a vow of honesty to him, there was almost nothing in my life that happened that I did not pause for seconds or sometimes even hours before taking a decision and putting it into action. And all of that time, I was in a situation where Sanskaric energy was very alert and alive in this situation. But because of my vow of honesty to Baba, I forced it to stay not into a new action or decision, but remained alive. And to see what happens to psychic energy over a period of time is incredible.
Then would you say like neither repressing nor acting it out?
You don't repress or anything.
Just willingness to suppress.
In order to be able to do that, however, there are 2 or 3 things that I had to learn. One is, let's say, what I call the principle of the neutral plateau. And that would just have to be something for another time. But also, there's a beautiful passage in the supplement in which Ghani talks about conscious forgetfulness. This is the same technique, but it calls for a tremendous amount of discipline and learning to be able to apply it. But there are tricks of the trade to assist you in holding things in abeyance but alive.
Well, we're not the first ones to suffer with these issues, are we?
Oh, we certainly are not. I'm sure the tricks of the trade have been around for a long time. Will be. Well, shall we be silent with Baba?
Should we make a plug first before we do that?
Yeah.
And then
Okay.
we'll be silent?
Yeah.
We're working right now on a book. Can we tell them about that?
Sure, absolutely.
Sexuality on the Spiritual Path is the tentative title. It may change, but it's this material that we're covering here, plus quite a bit more, because it's obviously a hot topic. I actually
Not a complex one.
I brought a bunch of newspaper articles that relate to some of these issues, because it's just in the news and everything, and a couple books also if anybody wants to see. But I think it's not going to go away, these issues. If anything, it's just going to come up more and more as people can deal with it more and more.
Yeah, if Baba has put a basic new archetype into existence, it's going to be a red-hot subject in our lifetime.
Yeah.
So, we have a bit of silence with Baba. Dearly beloved Baba, always in your heart. Amen. I think everybody's worn out, Anne.
You think?
Yeah, I think so. I'm sleepy.
You've been working hard.
Well, we've had good, solid 3-4 days, haven't we?
And another thing, for those who don't maybe realize, this is Mayor Baba's sadhya, and you're welcome to come up and have fun with
Touch it, put it up to your cheek, your ear, whatever not. It's well darned, well patched, and full of Baba.
Just some observations, okay? For us going for some money in the twin, it really is companionship. I'm telling you, okay, that's what this money is.
Teamwork.
Yeah, okay, that's a companionship. And that's why people go back and back again to re-like that companionship again.
And this is the magic word that Erich brought out.
Yeah.
The essence of the new life of the problem.
Yeah,
Companionship.
yeah.
Companionship of the act.
Yeah.
But also companionship of fellow beings, real companionship.
Oh, okay, not my family, I'm married.
Pleasure. It's wonderful. Good to see you. Good to see you. Be great. Thank you. Okay, Bob. Pleasure. Both sides. Okay. All right. Okay, Bob. Okay. Good. Good to be with you. Twice as good.
You said they were double the price.
Thank you. Good to see you.
In other words, they're double
This
faced.
is something I've always wanted.
Good. Thank you.
Can I convince you to sell more books? No, I mean, sign more books.
Yeah,
I should have brought my book to be signed.
Anybody got a pen? We'll buy another one.
Sounds like a good idea.
I didn't bring my book Sunday, so I brought it today.
So there you got it.
You can use this table.
Okay.
We'll put your bottle of flowers.
Oh, Monty, you're gonna get into the act too. Don't leave me out.
Good.
See, we're the 1st of June, aren't we?
We are indeed. It's moving right along. Or fours. Trucking along. Oh. That is so cute. She comes in to see. Can I get anyone drinks? Say again. Oh, it's money.
Have you landed?
Very good girl. Oh, good choice, good choice.
Well, I got a person, I'm gonna buy another one down.
Oh, boy!
We have a
How's
taker, we
that
have a
for something?
taker.
So I'm gonna give somebody a second-hand book.
There you go.
Like,
There's $7, so I'll give you some cheese.
that's fine.
Oh, thank you.
Usually, I don't endorse it to the person by name. Because I found a couple times when I did that, somebody inspired to add a sentence or 2 sentences, and that makes all right.
No problem. Thank you.
Just say I'm getting replaced
Hi.
I
I need a banker.
Yeah. Oh, it's okay. You can walk by. Oh no, you don't have to do that.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Practice of the previous incarnation.
Like giving hugs, you know. Hi. I'm wet. I'm all wet, but like, see.
Remember that it's just in the city right now?
Yeah, well, it's funny enough, it was my son's prom night, and so I had to choose next, asking, is he sure? You know, maybe come to, you know, all those people. No, Mom, and that, I'm here, but at the last.
I was always curious.
I had to be quiet.
It was not pre-knowledge, it was just happened sense.
Just follow.
Hey, you very good.
We have a copy that I left at home.
Oh, you like it? Yes.
Thank you so much. This is wonderful.
Yeah, he has a very good.
Very good. When is that book coming out?
Time and we'll see.
Actually, I think we're
You know
about
what I
halfway.
did that I had that I'd love to do sometime is on a Saturday. all the Baja people, and then we sing to each other, you know, you could sing the songs and we could sing our songs and we could, yeah. Well, but then, you know, like,
Pretty good. Yes, but better shape than I was when we started.
You're in misery after saying.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I don't catch the 919.
she was one who initiated.
Catch the 1000.
I know I had that ice pack, right?
She felt that.
That's right, ice pack it all.
Thanks, Don.
Because the one of the first trip I took the Inhibitions to Maryland,
Welcome to Chapel
I
Hill.
had
See the
in it or
nurse.
vision or something of an experience.
Now the
For
same
sharing
thing.
your song.
I have to remember to convey Dr. Morton's
Where she was, in this location, or not necessarily?
I don't think so.
No, yeah. well,
It was in a city,
occupied.
but the whole street had carpet, like red Persian
Here we are.
carpet over the whole street. And it was this whole interaction.
Marilyn, how are you going back by train?
It doesn't get right.
She walked
What about you?
We're going back by train.
around the city, walked kind of like silent, with her hands and with her knees. Kind of
I asked when I attended.
Are there any more of those?
There are some more
There are?
experience.
I think the next train is at 9:19.
Angela, the tapes inside are for sale?
What?
Yes.
Yeah.
9:19.
919.
And then the next one I think is an hour from now.
Oh my goodness.
Let me check.
Very confirmation of that experience.
There's still a couple copies in the city, so I can definitely give you some next time. Actually, this weekend, you're coming this weekend, right? Dr. Murphy. We must.
Oh, I wish I knew some. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, you can feel it, yeah.
So much. Oh, so am I. So am I.
There's 7?
Yes.
7?
Yes.
2. He's buying 2.
Oh, fabulous. I don't have a single.
Okay.
Let me give you.
Just put it in the kitty.
You sure?
Are you from New York?
No, she's got a lot of poetry, but yesterday.
You're familiar with Rabia.
She's one of, I feel, she's subject to her and our group, she's definitely
I tell you, I know, what he's listening about companionship.
The next one's at 9:19.
I wonder, what kind of circle do you have? A circle, you know, it's
One
like
of the women's sex is known as and in fact,
And then it's at
I haven't
9:19,
yet,
10:19, 11. I think we'll
put it
catch
in
the
the print, but
9:19.
it's on the book section on the women's sex, you know, who are connected in, and not all so personally.
You want to catch the 9:19 or the 10:19?
I just wanted to bring them up, but she had gone in, Barbara John, Husband Barbara John, because
He's actually flying tomorrow, so.
companionship with others is internally.
you know, even the story maybe not much is known, but how she escaped, you know, the confines of a narrow society, kind of religious society. Just became.
And that's where I've been, I put myself, I will put myself, you know, yeah, I have. I'm learning.
Yeah, oh, after September 30th.
The same group.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Once over the care of over, so,
You know the care of symbol?
Yeah, I do, but, okay, so eventually,
Okay, I'm okay.
you're gonna be with them?
Yeah, until we figure out, because we're moving from England. Figure out where we're gonna be in a minute.
Everybody wants to leave.
I did leave.
Oh, he's coming back. No, I was getting the feeling from you.
You know, some parts of it I love.
Must be in your mirror.
Some parts of it I don't love so much.
Yes.
So that's what I expect. I must have been pretty handsome.
It's been a long time since I've been in. I didn't think there really was.
That's what I assumed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Down for
I'd say that.
Very much down for, yeah, the law was actually by the time I came, that even the.
What makes you think
Yeah,
that?
and in a way, it was manipulated.
But I thought this is
I actually like, I don't pick you.
There's a prelude. She's
Oh,
agreeing. Staff kept coming.
I should have been there.
It's the end of the
Yeah.
Sopranos.
Great fun.
You know, you might like, you read about literature, ready to go outside of the restaurant.
Yeah, exactly.
That sounds like.
I thought it was getting his umbrella.
Oh, it's an old newsletter.
Yeah.
It's the old,
Funny to see his instant reaction.
society
I
newsletter.
think he was
Yes,
saying,
yes. Who?
I'm dead.
I'm dead.
Yeah.
What's your name?
Well, that easy.
Have you read?
Yes, not every one of them, but yeah.
Yeah.
You still
What about it?
You can send us a copy of the section of
Oh.
That's like
Please.
balance.
Yeah.
It's cut through.
Yeah.
So I've been, more and more drawn into it, and I would love
Put it back here.
I mean, that's.
Someday to
guess
see
so.
Yes,
one of the most beautiful
Could have a paper already on
flowers that
something
I've
else.
ever seen in my life.
Keep your book
And it
nice.
said that it's so.
You guys going?
You want a pencil to put it in? No, it's all right.
I think we're gonna go get some
I don't know
dinner.
what he
You might
said, but
move.
he said everybody around who sees there, yeah.
In that case.
I don't know whether Tom told you,
I sent copies
So,
to the,
I hope my
London
head
group
didn't come out.
and to the
Right, it
Spencer.
wasn't.
No, but I had to ask you to move because what it was in the very back of your head was like right in the middle of down
Oh, you
here.
want copies? Go ahead.
That works.
Especially with this dog.
It just didn't work at all.
It
just didn't work at all.
So far.
Sufism reoriented.
In that,
My
about,
Both
12.
sides too.
Yeah.
And
His
the-
team.
about the last one is made
So the
about.
next train is 9:19.
Great, I've looked at
With
it.
money and everything.
Well, you're way up there, you're way up there.
This stuff like
Astronomical
that.
numbers.
Look to read it.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, where all showers down.
What does it turn? Maybe it can help.
It was a water spell.
And this is his room.
Right.
And then fun.
He was a wild man.
My birthday, January 14th.
I'm gonna find a way to get to Baba Sadra before we go. Right now,
Made her up, like, give her instructions, and the next time we talk about, give it to them, it's my birthday.
This is great too.
The next
Powerful
time.
man.
Marilyn, did you need a lift back? Did you?
I-
You had mentioned.
I know, are you
Okay.
going back?
Lying around.
No, we're gonna stay here forever.
This is
I was saying that I thought we were gonna get something to
If you
keep
wear it,
over
you
with.
just hold it. Yeah.
Oh, that's
He
right.
also gave me,
I don't either.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on what you have arranged already. What,
I haven't arranged anything, I could just either take a train or not.
no, that one, yeah. Oh, I thought you were saying you had already read somewhere else.
No, she asked me.
No, yeah, we can, and then we'll figure out where we're gonna go from there.
It was always like.
Because you mentioned
Well, how
that
many years of
I had just asked
on Sunday.
Oh, yeah, I did, I know. I was gonna drive in tonight, but I thought there was gonna be too much traffic.
There was.
What time did you head out? I was gonna leave at 5 o'clock. I was getting ready, but.
We left at 5:30.
I've never done the ride, and I didn't wanna get lost. So you left at 5:30, and you had a lot of traffic?
Yeah, and it took an hour to get.
You know, I was
It took me, and it took me, I was on the train at 5 o'clock. I think it was 5:40. I was at Grand Central, and then the train, I had to get to, take another 6. I think I was like, it took me 50 minutes to get from my house to Metro, and then I had like a couple of minutes to just run on to. Yeah, it's lucky.
Oh, it's done on purpose.
Hi. All right. Marilyn.
Hi, Marilyn, I'm Perry, huh?
You Perry?
It's underneath it all.
Perry, huh?
Yes.
Same when you wake up. When you wake up,
I met
first
you
thoughts,
before.
Maybe.
Where do I know you from?
How do you mean that?
We have to make a scientific study about it. Yeah, we were just remembering each other. Oh, I knew you're me, yes.
I've not been doing a lot of my personal running.
All of a sudden, 2 days in a row, bring the truck. I said, Chuck, you really got to go. I said, you can't hang around.
So
And he
you're
said,
writing
no, he
the book
says,
together?
I want to draw this out. He said, no, I want to draw this out. I said, oh,
Very wonderful evening. And so you live also in the vicinity?
I mean,
I used to live in Manhattan.
how valuable he was in my life. Society.
I see you work together.
He was so valuable to me.
Well, part of my morning prayer drive time.
Yeah.
I say my prayer in the car and I have some song but I always end it
Oh,
with
very much. Very, very
the
much.
song
Yeah, I know. I mean, I've been more and more.
Now I've rewritten it.
Oh,
Do you know the one? I turn the key in the wine cellar door, and from ancient cats.
When are you going to put
So
this
thank
CD
you.
out?
Well, hopefully we'll meet again. Yeah.
It's one of my struggles to manifest
When you
that,
come back or
whatever.
Yeah, that'll
Maybe
it'll
some
be-
people-
it'll come right.
have a,
Don said he would.
he would.
He tried this time, it didn't work out.
Right.
Well, next time, awful good to see you, Tony.
Really.
I want to mention something.
Good night. Good night.
Thank you.
I remember him too. Zeke.
This is the end as far as I'm concerned of seminars. It doesn't, I try so much.
Inspired by Zeke for a woman.
I'll bring up some reason for
That's
this.
lovely. Your parents wanted to.
We'll have to come to
Just
England.
eat potluck.
We'll have to come to England and see what Bob and Josh.
Why not? Why not?
I'm looking forward
In
to
France also.
That's
In
interesting.
France too.
Wow. So you are a traveler.
By a series.
Oh, yeah.
Do you speak French? I'm so bad at language.
I worked hard on that.
He's working on English. It took me I'm still working. It took me 67 years to dyslexic and everything.
That's right.
Mirage will never quench your thirst.
That's my notebook there. Nice meeting you. I'm going to send you that probably by Monday. By Saturday, it'll be in there. And then we'll shut them including
But the more I took it, the therapist was so interested. Really? Yeah, he asked me what's the reaction.
It's very hard. I think it's a very, very difficult topic to drug issue.
Bruce Woodman.
I have
But that was interesting.
Good. Well, fine.
So you work when
A lot of things spread out in a lot of ways in different ways. That's all I can say. I sure.